Good morning. How's everyone feeling? Good, good, no? Kind of? Okay. Raise your hands if you're excited. Okay. Raise your hands if you're wondering where 2 years went. Okay. So, little warning here. I have a lot of words written down. They're also competing with a lot of my different thoughts. So I may or may not stick to the script. Thanks to everyone who is here today physically and in spirit. Thanks to the professors and the staff. Thanks to the family and the friends. Apologies to anyone who had to deal with the chaos that is a journalist on deadline. According to this degree, you're gonna have to deal with it for a lifetime, so sorry and thank you. I started this speech a bunch of times, and it's hard to really figure out what to say to a group of your peers. Even harder to figure out what to say when your peers are hella fresh. It was like, I knew that you guys were amazing when we got here, and then the last 2 days of the showcase and seeing everyone's work, I was just like mind blown, like yes, like this is the type of squad I want to be around. It's also kind of nerve-wracking to figure out like kind of like the opening act for all these big names and like what am I supposed to say and how's this supposed to work out? And then I had a bunch of different things I wanted to, quotes that helped me get through grad school, right? So I'm like, okay, I want to share all these quotes, and one of my favorites is, when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you achieve it. And I really held on to that quote like these 2 years. Like, I want this, it's gonna happen, it's gonna work out. Another thing is The Four Agreements, one of my favorite books, and it tells you, 1, be impeccable with your word. 2, don't take anything personally. 3, don't make assumptions. And 4, always do your best. And so those are sort of like guiding principles through grad school for me. And but then I got really nervous and started joking and saying I was just gonna get up here and read Jay-Z lyrics for 7 minutes straight. It's like, it makes sense, it works, you pick something from Reasonable Doubt, something from Blueprint, something from Black Album, drop the mic and you're good, right? I was only half joking when I said that. So when we turned in our thesis projects, they let us pick a victory song. And my victory song was You Don't Know by Jay-Z. It's from the Blueprint album, if you don't know. It came out in 2001. I was in high school, and I was full of doubts about what my next steps would be. And every time I got really worried, I just turned that song on, full blast, and like, all right, life is gonna work out, right? And I've sort of carried that with me over the last 15 or so years. And in the song, if you haven't heard it, there's this refrain, right? There's a voice that comes in and it says, you don't know what you're doing. And it says it over and over again, and then Jay's like, sure I do. And then like goes into all the different reasons why you know what you're doing and what's supposed to happen next. And my first journalism class was in 2004, and I was at the Medill School of Journalism, and everyone stood up and started talking about what their previous experience had been. And it was a lot of like editor-in-chiefs of school newspapers, yearbooks, like all of these different things. And I stood up and I was like, I'm a slam poet and I like magazines and rap music and I'm gonna be the next Danielle Smith, what's good? And they were like, you're not a real journalist. And I was like, okay, already carrying a lot of stuff with me. First generation college student from East Oakland, went to Northwestern trying to figure out my way, thought I had something together, and then they were like, you are not a real journalist. You're doing magazines and rap music, and that's not what this is about. So 4 years of doubt, 4 years of you don't know, and 4 years of me saying, sure I do, right? And I think about that a lot today, and like sort of the question is like, when everyone's really hyped up on graduation adrenaline, why am I talking about this? Why am I sharing this story? But it's because in the past few weeks, you see everyone's amazing work, but you also see the doubt start to creep in. You see the like, what are we gonna do next? Did we make the right decision? Why did we cash out so much for a degree when a career doesn't really pay that much? All these questions that we have, right? Like, when is Sally Mae gonna start knocking and will I have a job? Like, we wanna know these things, right? And so the doubt's creeping in, and I think that like, it's important to realize and important to recognize like, y'all are really dope. And y'all put together some really amazing work, and you have your cohort, you have your professors, you have your friends and family. And so my message was really today, like for my classmates, you know, when that voice starts to kick in and you hear the like, you don't know what you're doing. You know, whether it's a random naysayer or if that voice is internal, you know, we should all turn on the music and channel your inner Hove and just be like, sure I do. Thank you.
Thank you, Niema. That was outstanding. Let's hear it one time for the outstanding class of 2015. All of my friends here. This is off the script, but I was sitting there thinking to Niema talk, and people have asked, you know, what are you going to miss most? And the answer's easy. I'm going to miss the conversations, you know, the talk, the discussion. You know, what is truth? Where's Andy Mannix? You know? Anyways, another school year, you know, is over. And school years have a nostalgic feeling about them, graduations especially. And that's an interesting thing because the school year is sort of this ever-present cycle that marks the seasons of our lives. It marks the seasons of American culture, more or less. When I think of school years, I can remember back to donuts with Dad in first and second grade. I can remember in elementary school walking home in the Midwest autumn, smelling the leaves on the lakefront breeze, feeling them crunch beneath my feet. I remember the colors. You know, bright yellow, orange, blue sky. 2 school years ago, I was in New Orleans and teaching 3rd grade, and I remember I'd wake up at 6 a.m., I'd drive to school down St. Charles Avenue, Mardi Gras beads hang in the trees year-round there. I'd get on the highway rises up, curves with the Mississippi, and the French Quarter's off to your right, and on the left is St. Louis Cemetery, and it stretches all the way to Lake Pontchartrain. Then there's like the orange sun is rising up, and it casts this surreal light over the whole scene. I get off at Elysian Fields, drive into the 7th Ward, Gentilly. It used to be called Creoleville. And as you get further into the 7th Ward, more often you start to see houses that are blown out. This is 8 years after Katrina, boarded up, leaning over. And the closer you got to my school, the more frequent these houses became. They had giant, some of them had X marks painted on them. And the X marks were the water marks, where the water had risen during Katrina. And within the X's, there were 3 numbers. There was a top number for the date the house was searched, a number on the side for the crew that searched it, whether it was National Guard, Marines, whoever it was, and then there was a number in the bottom of the X for the bodies that were found in the house. And you had to drive through all these houses to get to my school. And then you turned onto the driveway where the school was, and a giant ruin like the Coliseum, there's this blown-out gymnasium, crumbling in the heat, being overtaken by the swamp. And behind that was 5 mobile units, like large motorhomes. Those mobile units were caged in by 20 feet of fence with razor wire. There's no mistaking what it looked like. It looked like a prison. So these 3rd graders would drive through those ruins every day into these buildings that looked like a prison, more or less. And in my classroom in May of my 2nd year teaching, the word that was above our board was transcend. You know, rise above your circumstances. And what does it take to rise above your circumstances? And in 3rd grade, it's pretty simple. You learn to read, you learn to write, you learn about math and science. You learn some more bedrock values on the playground, like empathy, compassion, and love. You know, and so then I'm thinking about, well, what the hell am I going to say? And I realized that we're after the same thing. We're looking to transcend our circumstances. We're looking to rise above the noise. And in journalism, transcending is becoming increasingly difficult. And so I'm thinking about this, and we come to school to learn from people with more experience and who are wiser than us. And oh my God, I've come across the most wise, generous, caring, beautiful people here. Professors like Joan Beater, Bob Kalo, Linda Schacht, Cassandra Herman, Tom Goldstein, Bill Drummond, John Else, and Orlando Bagwell. And those are just the professors I had, so no one give me shit. I'm talking to you, Paul Grabowitz. But there is one professor who had a particularly profound impact on my experience here, and that's Mr. Adam Hochschild. I was fortunate enough to be in 2 of his classes with one other student, the outstanding young writer, Miss Dorothy Atkins. Adam, the founding editor of Mother Jones Magazine, published 7 books, titles like Bury the Chains, King Leopold's Ghost, To End All Wars, multiple-time National Book Award finalist. And when I think about this transcend question, I wouldn't be so audacious to think I know the answer, so I go, Adam, will you meet me for lunch and tell me how to, do this? What should I do when we graduate? And he goes, sure. So we meet at Imperial Tea Garden, which is our spot. We've had multiple creative meetings there. And so I go, Adam, what does it take? And he says, first, pick a subject that is worth talking about, that is worth thinking about. I go, okay, and that reminded me of Michael Pollan came to our class one time, and he goes, all journalists eventually find a niche, the good ones, or writers, whether it's politics, health, sports. Well, Adam Hochschild's self-proclaimed niche is good versus evil. And I'm thinking to myself, the balls, good versus evil. And so I press him on it, and he says, well, you pick a subject that excites you. And I've been attracted to times and places where people felt a moral imperative to confront evil. Whether in bearing witness to the prison camp of Stalin's Soviet Union, battling apartheid in South Africa, exposing the forced labor system that King Leopold II of Belgium imposed on the Congo, working to end slavery in the British Empire, or resisting the madness of the First World War. And those are all Adam's books. I'm like, well, that's a good place to start, but how do you narrow it down? How do I get into that? And he says, smiling, he looks at me and takes a bite of his wontons, and he goes, well, the best artists can look at the big picture, and from that raw material, he or she can sculpt a reality that we can all find within ourselves. Then he dives into this story about Soviet Russia. He says, I'm just thinking, I did this book about Russians coming to terms with Stalinism. And the person that moved and delighted me most was maybe 60 years old when I met her. But we were talking about something she had done when she was 17. It was in the last year of Stalin's rule, this murderous dictatorship, where any real political opponents were exiled, murdered, or taken to the gulag. And who were the only groups that attempted to publish anything in a homemade way against the regime? High school students. They were too young and too naive to know that they had to keep their head down. So they made some homemade signs, they passed out leaflets. Of course, they were all immediately arrested or shot or sent to prison. But Adam says, but I found a survivor, one of them, and I went to see her in her apartment in the furthest northwest corner of Russia. And he said, she rented out rooms in her apartment to college students, and they're sitting there talking, and all these college students are around listening to the story. And she's telling them about how when she was 17, she was interrogated by the Minister of State Security himself, and then survived 5 years in prison. And Adam says, and I notice as she's telling me this story that all the college students start putting their books down. Well, first he said there's never enough room in a Russian apartment. And then he said that all the college students start putting their books down and becoming as engrossed in the story as he was. And he said there was this wonderful moment, a connection between the past and present, and time collapsed. And he says that's when you know you've got a great story. And I ask him, well, what does that make storytelling so powerful? And he says, we all like to read or hear stories about extreme situations, shipwrecks, feats of mountain climbing, survival in war. Not because any of us are planning on being prisoners of war or climbers of Mount Everest, but because we wonder, how would I fare in such a situation? And the situation doesn't have to be physically daring, it can be socially and politically daring, but when we are put to the test, it reveals who we are, and we all wonder that about ourselves. Then I ask him, well, what is it about this career? You keep doing this, why is it so special? And he says, well, in this career, you're allowed to step into other people's lives. He goes, you're allowed to do that in other careers too, like if you're a psychotherapist, you get to step in other people's lives every day. But he says you don't get to talk about it, and that's the fun part. He says, if I was a psychotherapist, I'd want to be like, you'll never believe this crazy guy that came in and what he said. But in journalism, you're allowed to talk about it. And he says, and when we step into other people's lives, it fosters understanding, empathy, and progress. We sat there for a moment in silence. Then, sensing my trepidation about the business and the bullshit of finding stories that matters, he says, but the best artwork always has and always will rise above the noise. Which brought us to process, how is the work done? And at this point I'm gonna say, I go, Adam, are you gonna be there Sunday? He goes, no, it takes a whole morning, and I write on Sunday mornings. And, thinking of my own, I go, is it still tumultuous, dramatic, gut-wrenching, just to write a single sentence? He laughs at me and he says, well, I think I'm a little bit better now of knowing when I got it right, but I wouldn't say it's gotten easier. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to do something that gets easier. I want to try new things, and I want to make each thing more challenging than the last and continue to expand my knowledge. And that brings me back to this idea of school and this feeling of nostalgia. And school feels nostalgic because learning makes us feel young. And I look at Adam, and he's got this boyish teenage twinkle in his eye. And I'm like, what is that? How would I write that? And I realize that twinkle is the joy of discovery in his eye. That's why he seems so young. So it seems to me as a journalist, I don't think it's our greatest responsibility to publish story after story and surrender to the black hole of the 24-hour news cycle to fill the ticker. I think it's our greatest responsibility to never stop learning, to stride boldly into the future in search of discovery, and to keep that childish twinkle in our eye. Thank you.